Welcome to the Movements Podcast. This is Steve Addison. Today we're going to be hearing again from Jeff Sundell at the Community of Practice that was held in Sydney, April 2013. And Jeff's going to be discussing with the participants today what it takes to form new disciples into new churches. I hope you enjoy the program.
Some of them are house churches, some of them are houses of peace, somewhere in between. But Ray is just pretty much totally straight up. Get into homes, he wins people on the street, gets in their homes, starts gospeling them. They're either homes, meeting in coffee shops, just a variety of things. They do a once a month gathering. They're trying that, and so they'll come together sort of once a month. But most of their stuff is just all in community and trying to move sort of towards house church. Okay, so there's a handful of guys sort of going this way. Then there's sort of this in-between thing. I'm going to put James and David have sort of they've got about 50 groups. They've sort of moved this way, over this way. Then there's another thing. Gary Stump still has a celebration service that meets weekly on Sundays, but it's very different. So they have 64 groups. Everything's done in homes. They're in an upper middle class area. But they have this art museum they meet at, and they're doing a service that's one-third, one-third, one-third. The idea being that if they win people into homes and they have a participatory worship service, that folks will hopefully stick. And they won't lose them, because the other thing that's all around us is churches. And so sometimes when people come to Christ, they just naturally want to go to church, which is cool. But if they go to a church where there's no desire to make disciples, what happens to the folks you just spent all that time reaching?
They just become passive observers of the Christian message.
Yeah, and it's a little frustrating. Now, I don't want to say don't go to church, because that's not right. This is Christ's bride, so I can't do that. So our thing is trying to find a hybrid that allows folks, so it meets this felt need of wanting to go to church. And now the nice thing that Ray has is they actually also have a separate area, another area of town where there is another church, so they can actually sort of meet that need that way. But not everybody's got that. So anyhow, this is an interesting thing that's emerging with Gary. So there's about there's probably actually about 9 folks giving that a go now. It's working pretty well. We haven't done well at it. We tried it at our church, and we haven't crashed and burned completely, but we're in the process of crashing and burning completely.
What went wrong for you, Jeff? You've seen what those guys did. What do you think was different about your situation?
I think our problem is we did this in the midst of a highly attractional church, Element Church, which is highly attractional. Low lights, like a nightclub. Huge desire, praise music, very flying helicopters for Easter, dropping Easter eggs,
Clean shirts? A clean shirt?
Well, I wouldn't say that. They are into sweaty, stinky shirts like me too, and they have tattoos up their arms and things. It's a variety. But the problem is, we were talking about this earlier, but Element it's like living beside a tornado. So everything you get near gets sucked in. But nothing gets thrown back out. So we would love to see a tornado and a hurricane coexist. It'd be the perfect storm. We could have people sucked in and thrown back out to do ministry, but right now we've not figured out how to do that. So at Element, we were trying to do this in the midst of Element's campus, and it hasn't worked well, because people, once they go to the attractional service, we never get them back out. And so it's been I don't know, it's a little discouraging. If they would go and they would keep going out, I wouldn't have a problem. But they usually go and then they park and we never get them back out. Now some people use the term disciple-making movement, sense in the idea of we're not going to call these churches, we call them disciple-making groups, something like that. But the other thing where I spend most of my time, is right here. We have traditional churches. So we have traditional churches now that are starting churches that meet in homes. So traditional Baptist churches Quite a few of them. You know, Cody Pinkney, they've got about 9, you know, that are somewhere anywhere from some believers gathered together to pretty healthy churches that meet in homes. And that's Desiring God Church, which is, that's a John Piper church plant. And so that's happening. The other thing is we're seeing, you know, like some traditional Baptist churches who are, and this is the one where it gets confusing. They're getting into homes, houses of peace, and then the idea is win them to Christ through, say, a Discovery Bible study or whatever it may be. But then they essentially want them to come back into the church. But from the top down, you know, as far as the leadership goes, the leadership is fully endorsing this, you know, as far as preaching, teaching, pushing it from a strategy point. And so there's some of this going on. What I just bring this out to say this is probably one of the biggest things that's happening now, like Tennessee, North Carolina, Mississippi, South Carolina, is this. And my problem is I don't know what happens to generational growth there personally. You know, I don't have any experience. Andy Evans got to some 3rd to 5th generation stuff, which was exciting as far as disciple making, but they all funneled back eventually into the church. So these groups sometimes will swell to 20 groups, and then they'll shrink to 30, shrink to 3, but a lot of the folks end up back in the church. That's good, but I don't know what that does to generational growth. So I just want to just sort of, I guess, be aware. I think this is where most of us are sort of hoping there's something new emerging, some type of a bit of a new wineskin that allows for sort of a tornado and a hurricane to work simultaneously with an emphasis with scattering, but celebrating during the gathering, but not letting the gathering overwhelm the scattering. And so, I don't know, we're hoping this might be something that comes out of it.
What about like the cell church guys? I mean, they've been doing this for a while, like Ying Chow and Larry Stockstill.
Ralph Nader?
Ralph, you know, because Tim and I with Ralph, you know, years ago kind of thing. They've got some stuff working here where they continually reaffirm the small group from the main group, and like they showcase the cell. They don't get an individual up, they get the cell up, and what are you happening, what's happening in yourself. In the big meeting, always affirming and sending. I'm just wondering if you've had a look at that at all.
I know nothing about, I mean, this obviously, some of this stuff looks much more like a cell church, but I don't know anything about as far as formally. These are just churches that have wrapped T for T in their DNA, and they're trying to get as many people in their church sharing their story, Jesus' story, and making disciples. But there's no intention of ever making any of these churches. Nor is it even clear if they're really trying to make a disciple-making group.
See, the cell church is trying to get their people out, and they are wanting to multiply cells.
Yeah. Yeah, in this scenario, I don't know, because you just have...
With new believers.
With new believers. So, in this one, I'm just saying, I don't know. These would mostly be very traditional, like Baptist churches in this scenario. But there are some giving it a shot. Anyhow, so this idea, that's where I'm putting sort of disciple-making movements here. I'm distinguishing a little different because there's really no intention of them being a church, but I know everybody's got a different definition for disciple-making movement. And then there's sort of a little more of a pure sort of church planting movement in this hybrid.
The potential problem on the left side of the equation is you'll end up with a lot of groups, maybe there may even be a limit, but they're all like the central church is like the spokes of the wheel. Mm-hmm. You know, they're all coming into the central. At some point, you maxed out because they're not church in the sense that we're ultimately responsible for ourselves, financially, for evangelism, for reproducing, and so they tend to get drawn back into the central thing, and they may have trouble getting to second, third, fourth, fifth generation, Because everything's still got to be tied back in centrally.
Yeah.
But it's still better than doing nothing.
Absolutely. That's
a lot
why
better than doing
it's
nothing.
hard to, it's almost like using T for a church growth strategy versus a multiplication strategy, if that makes sense.
Yeah. But do you ever find multipliers? So maybe 80% it's around the central thing, but then you pick up a couple of people that can multiply without having to draw it back in. Does that happen?
Well, of this group, there's more and more folks open, shockingly, to plant churches that meet in homes.
Yeah.
So I think there's going to be more and more opportunities. I was at First Baptist Plano, which was a mega church, now runs about 800, and they're going, yeah, we're willing to start churches that meet in homes. So and now they're looking at both. It's a bit of a blended model. You have them, they're willing to do churches that meet in homes, but they're also looking at sort of this house of peace that might come to Christ and then come back to the church. So it's both and. It's not nice and clean. But I think we need to celebrate it also, because I don't think we get into a dichotomy and say, this is wrong or this is wrong. I think it's just I'm not a church growth guy, and so I don't have confidence that we can get to generational growth there anyhow. But I think this is where a lot of us, at least in the States, is headed.
But I think the question still remains whether a church is committed to, like, the way that I got into the headspace I'm in now was because I was always looking for a way of reaching the whole of Canberra, 350,000 people. And I realised that if people just came to church, it had never happened.
Yeah.
A few people, it never happened. So it wasn't until I looked at the whole multiplication of disciples making churches and multiplying churches, I thought, no, this is a plan that can work. I can actually see how it can work. So, it is fair to say, yeah, it's great that new disciples have been made, but Jesus didn't say that we were just to have some nice churches. He said we had to preach the gospel to every person. And so, if there's going to be a commitment to that, sometimes you've got to say you can't be committed to that and to that. Mm-hmm. And so every church leader has to make a decision about what it is they're committed to, because at the end of the day, it's going to tell out.
Yeah.
Can I just ask another question about Andy, who was a pastor who gave his people the option? He told them, your Thursday night group in the trailer park, that's church. You don't need to come here. Mm-hmm. But most of those people came on Sunday.
Yeah.
Caused conflict with the small group of traditional members.
They're about all dead, but yeah.
So how has that worked out? Are they all coming back? And did I hear you say that has stunted the generational growth that was happening?
Yeah, Andy at First Baptist Spindale at one time ran 25 to 30 groups. Some of those would have been fairly healthy house churches. There's still some house churches left, but the vast majority have come back into the church.
Okay.
Now the interesting thing is the church,
He didn't encourage them back, though.
He did not. He actually was trying to kick them out the door. They were running about 35 when Andy started. They would run about 140 to 160, I would say, right now. But most of those are people who were lost who came to Christ. And there was generational growth in there. There was some third to fifth, and some of the third to fifth is now in the church. So it's the trailer park thing, some of that stuff's still going on, but the 25 to 30 right now is more like 3. Now, did the growth disappear? No, not really. It's actually in here. Anyhow, it's he's buried most of the original 35. I think there's about 6 or 7 left.
Were there any suspicious circumstances?
Not so far that we know of.
What would be the problem in small groups functioning as properly as churches, Wednesday night, Thursday afternoon, whenever it might be through the week, but still as going to an established church on Sunday? That still would not interfere with them. In fact, they're just involved in 2 congregations. You might say Sunday morning,
for me,
but
it's
also
not a problem,
church on Wednesday night or whatever.
Yeah.
There's no real problem in that, is there?
No. As long as the leadership is pushing it, the problem we're having is leadership is pushing it, but the tornado is so strong, sucking them back in, the hurricane gets wiped out.
Yeah.
And so what Andy's having to do right now, he's getting ready to make another push to push people back out in homes. But now he's going, maybe I just need to kick over and go here. Because he's sort of tired of doing pushes. And then, they got good music and, people like to come in and hang out together. But then they get comfortable and then they stop doing what they were doing. So if we could find a way, it's just, so far we've not seen a way to do it. I mean, at least us personally.
Yeah. The other question I had, early last year when I talked to Neil at Element Church, they were calling all their all groups were transitioning to T4T, calling them T4T groups, but what they found is they were still very much in a traditional mindset. They weren't really living out the principles. How did that? What's the lesson from that?
Well, we started a hybrid service, and we have groups here, but essentially all of the church that we were trying to get into T4T gravitated down to the other campus. So they're avoiding this.
Where someone wasn't bothering them about living.
Yeah, where
this
nobody's
kind of
bugging them.
Obedient disciple kind of lifestyle.
Yeah. So this is sort of back to now. We have added to it by winning people to Christ and in discipleship groups. But our thing is maybe we just ought to keep them in the homes rather than even have the temptation of this. Because the temptation of this is it sucks them down here. They're within 100 yards of one another, so there's just this thing that just draws them in. And
so would you say that? And I'm sorry, I missed what Gary's doing. That seems like it might be working, but it sounds like there's a fairly consistent pattern that when people got into a Sunday congregation, it tends to minimize. It's not easy to do both. Conceptually, there's no problem with it, but in reality, am I hearing you say that it's not really working that well?
So far it hasn't. No. This has just been really. It's expansion contraction is the best way I describe it. So we have a push out, and then there's suction in, and we just can't seem to get the perfect storm going both ways at the same time. I hope we figured out. The nice thing about Gary's is these folks who come to Christ, and there's church buildings littered, through the community out here. And so people look at it and go, are y'all not telling me the secret? Am I supposed to be going to church? Is there something you're not telling me? There's a bit of suspicion, So by having this, they came to Christ through Discovery Bible Studies. They came to Christ through participation. They came to Christ in a place where they got to talk and ask questions. Now they're going to service where they get to talk and ask questions, and it's participatory, and there's worship and things like that. So this is enough different. It allows them to be part of this, and we don't screw up the DNA. Two is it sort of alleviates this tension so they can go here. The other thing is the attractional folks who are coming to see church or coming to church, they look at this and go, let's go back up here. So it's sort of repelling them.
One of the interesting things that Bill said last year when he talked about this thing about where you put church formation within the short-term discipleship process, and he said, churches tend to multiply where cell groups and home groups and stuff don't, because they take responsibility within themselves. And he said he puts the church formation lesson fairly early in the short-term discipleship, so the people in the group know where this is going.
Yeah.
And they begin to self-identify that we are church, and then they begin to identify, here's the things we need to integrate within our life together, and we'll be church. Which, that's why when I rewrote my lessons, I put church formation at session 6 in the short-term discipleship. I'm not getting that far often, which is another problem, but I still think that's the right thing to do. At least in theory, I think that might alleviate some of this itchy feet. Hey, should I be going to a church? When you know that this is really where we're heading, but they don't know that yet, unless of course you do that lesson.
See, 7 Commands of Christ really is church formation, because it's really all of the commands are moving towards church formation. And then we would go straight into the 9 elements of a healthy church. So as far as I'm concerned, we have everything pointing towards church formation, but it still hasn't alleviated this.
Yeah.
And and here's I personally do not, I can't say the right word. I'm not willing to vilify Christ's bride. It's his bride. It's his bride. It's what he called it. And I know there's a remnant of very solid believers who love Jesus in those. So I can't vilify them. And the only way right now that's to sort of stick in this model is to vilify this. Yeah. So you're in a bit of a tension. So we're going to help other people grow their churches, which is frustrating because it hurts generational growth. I'll tell you one thing I did, and I'll send you the lesson that we're trying that's different. We have added a lesson, and we do 4 stories. We do the story of we do the story of Matthew's house. We do the story of Cornelius' house, Lydia, and the jailer. And we ask 3 questions. And we ask these early on because the House of Peace, we had to do this in Asia to help clarify for the House of Peace. So we ask 3 questions. Where did they meet? When did they meet? And who met with them? So where did Levi meet? In his house. When did he meet?
Dinner.
Yeah, dinner. It's not exactly what time, but there's a meal. There's a dinner, something like that. But it doesn't really specify. What about who met?
Disreputable sinners.
Yeah, a bunch of sinners came, right? And Jesus was there. Now Cornelius, where did they meet with Cornelius?
In his house.
In his house. When did they meet?
When Peter arrived.
In the daytime.
They were meeting before?
Yeah, that's right.
Probably day and night while he was
Day and night. It's not real clear, but they met. We don't know when. Who met with them?
His whole household.
His whole household. Families, servants, workers, maybe other soldiers.
Yeah.
Lydia's house. Lydia's. Where did Lydia's place be? River and then the house. Verse 40, clarifies the house. When did they meet?
After the river.
Whenever.
Don't know. Yeah, exactly. Who met with them?
Her household.
Household.
And the
Maybe some of the
would come
believers in
missionary.
purple dye.
Paul, after some initial feeling uncomfortable, he and his team went to stay with him.
Yeah, verse 40.
And some other new disciples that we don't know how they got there, but they got converted.
They came into that also. The jailer. So where did they meet?
His house.
His house. When did they meet?
After an earthquake.
After an earthquake.
Very early in the morning.
Who met with them?
His whole household.
Household. Okay.
That's 3 questions. You say there were 4 stories, 3 questions.
4 stories, 3 questions. Then what I'm asking now with believers after they look at that, okay, where do you need to meet?
Home.
In the home. Who do you need to invite?
Family and friends.
Anybody can come to the refrigerator, right? When do you want to meet? Or when are you going to meet? You set the time. So, anyhow, that's what we're going to try now.
When the barbecue's
And so we're not trying to vilify this. We're just pointing to the New Testament, not authoritatively, just arguing for house church only. We're just saying, where was the New Testament pattern for meeting? Who met? And when should we meet? I don't know. That's going to be our attempt to try and figure out how to deal with this. But I don't know. This is my next. We're giving it a go. So far it's worked pretty well, but again I can't say conclusively. But I like it. It's from Scripture. It's pretty straightforward. It's really simple. It's
Leading
reinforcing. Yeah, it's a bit of a leading question.
Slightly selective passages. I object. He's leading the witness, Your Honor.
Well, but I can point to about 16 passages on that if I wanted to, and I actually put them in the lesson down at the bottom. But it was just trying to say, where could we meet, when could we meet, and who could meet. And it definitely emphasizes oikos.
I like that.
So,
See that? other thing, like Acts 2, it talks about the church met house to house and in the temple courts. So they had the big meeting in the temple courts, and then they went house to house and broke bread and so on. So cell church paradigm was, we need a big meeting and we need a little meeting. You know, we got this two-winged bird idea, and you don't kind of do one at the expense of the other, but they both interact and affirm. One of the things I suspect is that I can't preach the word in the way that I can from, say, the pulpit in the house, where together we're discussing. And I wonder what, don't tell anyone else this, but I wonder whether there's some deficiency in some of my disciples because they actually haven't had the word preached, thus saith the Lord, from the front. So, you know.
Yeah, I don't know. And then Acts 8:1 came, you know, so it's, and it never happened again. So
Sorry,
it's
Acts 8:1.
Acts 8:1.
Persecution.
Go away.
Persecution.
Well,
They went back in the home after that.
Yeah.
Never went back to
They
the
weren't
temple.
Meeting for very long in
In
the
the
temple.
temple.
Yeah.
And it doesn't happen anywhere else.
Now it never happens again.
What about the whole experiment?
That's evangelism. It never talks about the church meeting there. It talks about Paul
Synagogue
proclaiming
was
the gospel.
evangelism. Yeah.
Probably in the
He didn't
hottest
last
part of the
24
day
hours.
when no one else
Synagogue.
wanted to use it.
And I mean, you could say that they met in the temple courts for apostolic teaching, which the Bible would represent also for us. Because
But we don't even know in the temple courts whether it was one big meeting, whether they really would have been 3,000 or whatever, or whether it was groups. Because the temple courts was a mingling
Teaching area,
place.
yeah.
It wasn't a sit down in congregations place.
Was it Hillsong?
It would have had a bang. It would have had a bang.
I bet they have.
Anyway.
Anyhow, we're going to give that a go, even with these guys.
Upper room you had their meeting in a maybe it was well anyway. Go on.
So anyhow, a lot of these guys are really, I mean, they're pushing to do stuff that meets in homes. So it's not an issue from the pastor's leadership standpoint. It's an issue because of this is out here. Do I need to be here?
Yeah. I think it's important for us to maybe say, though, but probably here in Australia that's less an issue than it is in the U.S. because people have less of a bias to going to church on Sunday. So it's probably not as big an issue here. Because many of the people we reach aren't itching to get to some church building on Sunday.
yeah, I reckon that's absolutely right.
Yeah, probably.
And they're more
we've had
rebellious anyway.
New believers, though, who their background is Chinese communism. They've been in the country maybe for a year, and they've said, well, when do we go to church? So you can still get it. There's still,
Yeah, but I don't reckon you get it with Aussies, just with straight up and down Aussie.
Jeff, would you be able to send through that?
I will. Yeah, I'll send it to. If Steve, I get beside his thing, I'll send it to Steve, and then we can send it out. It's anyhow.
Guarantee we'll need to use it somewhere along the way.
Yeah. Well,
It's been in a habit.
we're just adding. We're tacking it on the end of the 7 commands, and we're tying it into church formation.
Yeah.
So it's actually going to be our lesson before church formation now. And we're going to. We're also starting to try to teach the oikos and the house piece closer together, because I think I created a bit of a dichotomy in America between the two, and we're trying to sort of bring them back a little closer because people are trying to make the house of peace way too complicated. House of peace is just where's their spiritual hunger, join where God's at work, and gospel them, either through Romans Road, Creation of Christ, Discovery Bible. I don't care. If there's spiritual hunger, just join God. You know, so we're just trying to. We're going to try and simplify that because it's created a barrier for a lot of our folks, especially church folks.
Can I ask a question about the House of Peace? How have you seen people interpreting, fleshing out, stay in that house, don't move from house to house?
Man, once folks understand the house of peace, they have had no problem staying in there. It's just getting them over the mindset that possibly they got to do something in a home has been the hard part. But, man, Clint took to it like, just total loving it. Man, Kevin, my dad, I mean, everybody I can think of, once they get the concept, it's not been an issue. It's more of getting the concept. But most everybody's really loves staying in the homes. Actually, sometimes it's hard to, dynamite them out of the homes because they tend to stay too long. But So we haven't really had a problem with them staying in. It's just been getting them in. But that's just our experience has been more of that. Except for Neil. Neil, our pastor, doesn't stay long. We can't get him to stay 6 weeks anywhere. He's just sort of here and there. But Neil's we've got to work on Neil to stay in there a little longer. But he's a busy guy. He probably shouldn't be doing all the house of peace stuff. But so far we've not. We're telling everybody 9 months to 3 years in a home, and that's not been so far been an issue. It's been harder to definitely move them out.
After those 9 months to 3 years, what happens?
Well, by then they're they've either multiplied. Now the other thing we are doing is we have some of them that doesn't look like they're ever going to multiply, and we're gathering them. Like Clint's got 4 groups in one area, all within 100 yards of each other in homes. And so they're gathering into now one house church that's going to rotate meeting in different homes. And they get along well. It makes sense in that particular area for that to work. So I think that's going to work out okay. So there's a couple of the guys that are going to multiply out definitely, like Nick and Kayla. Some of the others, I'm not so sure they're ever really going to multiply. There's a lot of stuff, like we've talked about alcohol and drugs, and so they're going to end up getting gathered in a group, and there's going to be more of a caring over them. And then they're getting tied into some things like that. But that's one thing we're looking at doing is combining some of the groups so they're a little bigger or a little more stability in that scenario. So it's not just 1 or 2. So that's one thing we're trying.
So Jeff, what's a good size for a church?
3.
We're 7 to 15 is pretty normal for us. Asia would have been 15 to 25.
Right. Okay.
But right now, it's so new in where we're at. We're more in. There's a few, like Ricky's place where they got real big. Mickey's place got quite big, but most of them 7 to 15. Most of the homes we're talking about in those mill villages, more than 10's a push in most of the homes. Our house we will run 25. So
People can find the house.
my house. Well, it's a little different with my house. Yeah, I'm hiding. My house is in camo. Any other questions on that? But we've just begun. When I go and talk to the context of the traditional church, I talk to them about disciple-making movements. Again, because I don't want to throw away Christ's bride. That's not my job. So when they ask me to train them, and then also when I train them here, I teach them Envision, and then I teach them who to share with. I teach them a gospel presentation and discipleship. And then we talk about disciple-making groups. And then I wait for the follow-up to see if we can go to church. But my thing is right now I'm trying to sort of overwhelm these guys at least with getting more people sharing their story, Jesus' story, and making disciples, so that I can get back in there and maybe influence them towards church planting. But I just don't know, right now. Some Desiring God is definitely planting churches, so that's exciting. And they're having an influence overseas. And so if we can keep having Desiring God successes, with what God's doing there, that's a good thing. And so we get a couple hundred of those, and that's going to be a really good thing.
Is John Piper on message with that?
Yeah, they've sent folks down to check us out a couple times. So they've sent elders down.
Because he's quite a peanut boy here in Sydney.
Yeah, and they're keeping an eye on what we're doing, and so they're trying it in a couple places. So with the ethne, they're doing this up in their area. But right now, no, they're pretty well behind it. We haven't had any pushback majorly.
Yeah, Jeff, I just wanted to clarify something. So, say you have a church of 12, and over the 9 months to 3 years that church is meeting, maybe half of those people will go and start their own church or something, and the other half will just be part of that gathering. Other people might join that gathering, or that gathering might die. That's the picture that I get. Is that kind of what happens?
It it could be any one of those three. I wouldn't say any. It's hard to ever say a house church. I don't like to use the word die. They don't die. A lot of times they transition or reorganize themselves and move places. So like if you go back here, and now right now it's still there, but if you were to go to Rebecca's house, and did Rebecca, if you go to that location, is it gone? Yes, it's gone. Rebecca moved to Florida, and now she's tied into a work in Florida where we're doing T for T. Her mom right now doesn't want, she never bought into the gospel, never came to Christ. Right now does not want any part to do with Discovery Bible Study. The rest of these, though, have gathered together into one group. And then Nick and Kayla, it looks like, that he's got a group going with his dad, and we're trying to get him to get a group going at the racetrack. We'll see. But Nick and Kayla are definitely going to multiply. But then some of the other folks, they're going to, right now, just probably be more attending or being part of the group.
It sounds quite fluid.
Yeah,
People can move between gatherings quite easily, and it doesn't really...
Yeah, if you were to talk to Kevin when we did it, one of the interesting things that we have seen, this is a surprise, we didn't see this in Asia, we see in America, we have people that attend multiple groups a week out of pure hunger for discipleship. So like Kevin would be in 7, 8, 9 groups a week. And now he starts numerous groups, and he's trained a guy named Ricky who started 20-plus groups down in Chesney. I've had nothing to do with Ricky at all. Ricky's a mill worker and has done phenomenal work. They've started other works, other places. But these guys, a lot of them bounce around to a lot of groups, and then they don't have any boundaries as far as denominations and boundaries. That's where it's messy, So, but I don't think it's a bad thing. They're sort of cross-pollinating, learning from one another, but they're also encouraging one another. But there's a lot of that goes on, and nobody encouraged anybody to do it. They just did it.
Jeff, I'm sorry, I probably sound like a wet blanket, but I'm just struggling with a couple of things. I sort of like to start from a theological base. And historically, church has been defined by a number of things. We're talking about how people from a whole lot of different perspectives have thought about church. And one of those things, when Paul went out in front of the church, how do we define a church? Well, obviously he appointed elders in that place. So when I understand an elder, someone who has the ability to teach the scriptures, the authority to be able to teach the scriptures. So for me, a church is someone who's got an authoritative person who can teach the scriptures, an elder. The second thing that happened with churches in the New Testament, as far as I'm aware, is this issue of discipline. So the elder then was responsible for teaching and then maintaining discipline of people who really do that. The third thing, I think, in traditional churches anyway, was that church was somewhere where they could celebrate the sacraments. However we understand that, but certainly there was baptism, communion, whatever sacraments. So those sort of three elements I think are really important for me historically, as I think theologically about the church. I'm just wondering how that ties in with some of your thinking about the church, particularly the sense of elder and authoritative teaching the word.
I mean, the one thing is you're taking a snapshot at the church at a point in time. And you can't, in this, you can't really take a snapshot. We could take a snapshot right now and right here, and it would look different than it will a year from now. So the way I like to look at it, if you were to think of an acorn, so you got this little acorn. Now what's the acorn have a potential of being? An oak tree. So are many of these groups, full-blown, that doesn't look very much like an oak tree, but anyhow.
What is that?
That's supposed to be an oak tree, but it's because it's pink,
It's an American oak.
It's an American oak. It's a pink oak.
Looks like an oak tree in the US.
Yeah, somewhere in here there's an oak tree.
Oh, there we go.
That's bad.
So, I think you're taking a snapshot of, even in right there in the New Testament, you're taking a snapshot of a point in time, where that church was. Now, if you look in Acts chapter 14, and it says that he went back and appointed elders in the church. And Paul or Luke could have said, we appointed elders in the fellowships or in the preaching points, but he didn't. He said this group of believers that was an acorn was a church, but he appointed elders into it. And, it depends on your interpretation, what you think of that. For a Baptist, that's a thumbs up, thumbs down. I think it was local folks appointing an elder, thumbs up, thumbs down. If you're from the top down, you're saying these people from the outside appointed the elders. We can argue as long as you want on that. You're not going to change me, and I'm not going to change you. That's just that's ecclesiology, how we choose to make those decisions. We have a myriad of ways of doing that within this room, and that's fine. We have 4 views of how ecclesiology, how the church functions, and that's no problem. So the only thing I would say is, yes, we, in the long run, if it makes sense, we want to see elder types or elders that are managing several churches. Because that's really more what we're looking at, is there's an elder who's probably over numerous churches, these numerous acorns. Now, if there gets a point where they're moving closer to an oak tree, and they want to have a building even, praise the Lord, let them get a building, and we would help facilitate that and be totally on board with that.
I'm not so much concerned about the issues of appointment. I'm thinking moving from Acts into the epistles, really.
Yeah.
Teaching and thinking in terms of really that whole role of teaching, and Paul is very clear about what are the characteristics of an elder. All the things, his ability to be able to teach.
Yeah.
It's just whether you're going to get that on day one.
Yeah,
So when
it seems that's what Paul did. He went and appointed churches, he appointed elders. And
we appoint elders. We're totally into that. Absolutely.
But he didn't always appoint elders on day one. There were churches that didn't have elders.
Yeah.
When Peter left Cornelius after 2 days, it was 2 days. I'd say they were church, but I would be surprised if Peter appointed elders. Now, Cornelius probably stepped up,
functioned in a role,
and Peter or one of his workers would have circled back and at some point, working with that congregation, formally recognised who were elders there. But I think they were a church before they got to that point. And most of the New Testament churches, most people lived in tenements, in high-rise, so you could fit about 8 to 10 people. And I think most of them, there would have been multiple churches that an elder or a group of elders were responsible for. So you may not have even found, in our local house, church meeting in this house or this room, that there'd be an elder there, but there'd be an elder in the city that was taking some. So I think, I don't know that you could say something's not a church till it's got an elder. Because your guys who are starting fulfilling a function, an apostolic function.
Yeah, they're elder role.
That in other words, the congregations are not without correction and teaching.
Yeah.
It's just like when Paul's thrown out of Thessalonians, it may be a while before they can't necessarily be there every week.
Listen, this one here, disciple-making movements, they are definitely functioning without an elder. I mean, as far as in the local group. The elder is under the umbrella of the church, because that's definitely these. This one here, they have elders. They have elders. They are absolutely 100% appointed. Gary does his over groups of 10, so an elder would oversee 10 house churches. And they wait, and when they're ready, they raise up more elders. That's how they chose to run their ecclesiology. Now, I'm a Baptist, so I don't mess with people's ecclesiology. That's one of the Baptist sort of tenets. But it's an easy cop-out of a wet blanket, right? So I just said, I don't want to answer that question. But it's really how they organized themselves and chose, because they're trying to figure out what's this look like in America. And we don't know. We know we don't necessarily need an elder type in every single one of these groups, because this is a pretty blended approach. This one, these guys are still working through this, but they have some elder or elder types, definitely. They have way too many theologues in there. That's the one thing I could tell you, because they draw in a lot of CIU guys. But they're getting some direction from Riverbend, and Riverbend has appointed several elders among this house church network, and then this house church network has freedom as they see. And I'll tell you the other thing is you have sort of two views on two scriptural things. You have Thessalonica or Macedonia where they appointed elders, fairly young elders or younger elders. The qualifications between Titus and Ephesus are just slightly ever so different, but just a little bit different. And you get the idea in Ephesus, of course, Paul spent a lot of time in Ephesus, so his time with the elders, he had a lot more time with them. And so he could appoint much more mature elders because he was there for 3 years. But you go to Thessalonica, and he's there 3 Sabbath days. Now, he leaves behind people to disciple and minister, and so they appoint elders, but they might be a little younger. We're looking at, in the scenario we're at right now, we're saying we're Ephesus. We don't need to be in a rush because we have pretty good elders and leadership, and so we don't need to be in a rush to push them in that. But Desiring God Church, when they're looking at this Chinese house church of 30 people, they moved fairly quickly to appoint an elder or a couple elders. They're doing a plurality of elders. So now they're still connected in an oversight sense to Desiring God Church. But they've definitely worked through the elder issue. They're more of an appointing elder than a thumbs up, thumbs down elder. They come about it a little different, even being Baptist. So the only one that I would say the exception of this is the disciple making movement. There's not elders in the sense of in the churches that meet in homes, but it's really because the church is never intended to be. Yeah, but all the others are definitely using elders. It's just sometimes they're overseeing 10 groups instead of just one, and waiting to see where God works, and then, as it makes sense, appointing as needed. So,
but with assuming though, surely from the word from day one, if there's a group of people meeting in a home, there would be someone who would be recognised as the leader of that group from within the group.
Well, first is us.
Yeah.
Because we're starting the group.
Yeah.
Then we're working to raise up leaders, and it usually is pretty apparent who that person is. But I'm not going to rush to appoint somebody as an elder in that scenario, because I would rather wait and see if I got 5 people there, I don't need an elder. I'm essentially the de facto in that scenario. Now, if that group grows and it gets more complicated, then we start needing an elder type. And again, it sort of depends whether they're tied into a network or not. And so you got to. I would rather go right now. I guess we're saying let's move a little slower since we don't know what this looks like in the States. And it's all very new. So we're trying to look at the New Testament as closely as possible, be guided. But yet we're not quite, we don't want to I don't want to have to say every single one of these house churches has to have an elder, versus trying to figure out what this structure looks like, just slowly, I guess.
Yeah, Jeff. So when I'm reading like Ian Kai's story, it feels to me like just about every Christian who can start their own group has the potential for leadership of that group.
Mm-hmm.
And it's always sort of conflicted with this other idea that there are certain people in the body of Christ that have the gift of leadership. Whereas I feel like when I'm reading the Yin Kai thing, every Christian has potentially got the gift of leadership. I don't know if other people feel like that, and what would you say about that?
Now, I think what he's saying is everybody has the ability to obey the Great Commission. Everybody should be sharing their story, Jesus' story, and making disciples. And so a lot of these groups are, they're disciple-making groups. They all need to be doing that. Everybody has the authority to be doing that. Everybody has a responsibility to do that. Now, again, when you come into qualification of who can lead a group, your Scripture limits who can lead the group. And now it's up to your interpretation, but, again, my interpretation would look quite Baptist, and there's going to be a limit of who can lead that church, that group.
So you think those initial groups that form around the person it's a discipleship group, not really a church yet, and so that you don't.
I wouldn't say that. I'm saying an acorn. I don't.
Yeah.
Luke never called anything less than a church, a group of gathered believers that were baptized, discipled. He always called them a church. The question is, where is the snapshot on the way of what we're doing? Because right now, tonight we're taking a snapshot of some of what's going on in the States. A year from now, it'll look vastly different. And so there may be more elders here. Maybe some of the churches rearrange. So that's, does that make sense? So I just think we got to, again, you're thinking process. And what we usually take a picture of is the maximum of what is a church, instead of, sort of back here we're looking at the minimum. And of all of us are somewhere on this continuum. And we're just taking a snapshot of where we're at. Now our goal is healthy church, the oak tree.